Choosing a clothing brand name could be quite difficult, but it's not as hard as you think it is. Honestly, it's quite simple, and usually simple is better. So I'm gonna dive down through all the details, all the tips that I can give you as someone who's been in the clothing brand industry for about almost 7.5 years now, and 4.5 years actively, almost about to be 5 years in June. So fairly close. And I will tell you that, I failed my clothing brand 6 different times. On the seventh time, I made it, and I have owned two clothing brands in the past. I sold one. That's a long story. And this is for my second channel. So if you're more interested in all the other details and all past, more of that personal side, then I highly recommend to check my first channel. That's my main channel. This is just my clothing brand channel by the name, you could tell. But it's basically just for the clothing brand. So, or clothing brand videos and details and stuff like that. But that's just pretty much self-explanatory. Like I said, you interested in all the behind the scenes, the personal stuff, personal channel, first channel, that's what you're looking for. So let's get straight into the video. As I said, choosing a name is usually pretty difficult for most people starting off. And it really depends on what you're trying to do exactly. For example, are you looking for more of a like a streetwear line, or like a luxury fashion, or a casual or old money aesthetic? Or you have to really dive down to figure out what you're gonna basically make. What's your product? What's your service? Basically everything like that. Also, you're gonna have to do a bunch of research before doing anything. So we're gonna start with the name, obviously, as the title of this video. But just doing your simple research on terms of your customers and stuff like that can usually come to a better result, more success chance. Basically, chances get higher. But you also should try to understand your target audience, your emotion, your vibe, or your like your persona, or like your character you're trying to put into the clothing brand. For example, if you make very like old money aesthetic, you wouldn't say like, for example, California streetwear. That don't even make sense, like, because you're making old money aesthetic type clothing, or like more like dress appropriate clothing. So you have to like really dive down. Pretty self-explanatory, honestly. Also, your name should be more simple toward a core ideal. You don't want some really crazy long name unless you have like a very specific niche and something that could connect to a wide audience, or like more like a target audience. Obviously everyone connects to a target audience, but more like a niche audience that will see the name and be like, oh yeah, I know that for sure. For example, locations like, oh, Long Beach or Washington, or Montana, or like something like that. Let's say you're making like clothes for like ranches and stuff like that, like hats or something like that, and you'll like have a name connected to that. So that's also another great example of why you should probably connect it. And I say why is because most of the time, there's a lot of clothing brands out there that just don't have their name connected to their like the style of clothing, and it works pretty well. It works pretty fine. I'm just saying that like I recommend doing that because that's what I've done, and that's what almost everybody I know has done. I only know one clothing brand owner who's not done that, but his name for his clothing brand is quite unique. It's basically just 3 letters, and it's RST, and that's what he just named it. Very simple, very unique, honestly, because it doesn't really mean anything. He just said he wanted to give it a name, and he named it RST, and it worked pretty well for him. So simple is usually better, and I say that a lot because it really is true. Simple is usually better. You usually want to choose a more simpler name. You don't want some crazy like adjective before the name too, unless you have like a very unique aspect to your brand. But if your brand is just very typical and normal, and yeah, like, obviously you're gonna need a winning product, but that just leads to a completely different category and stuff like that. That leads to a completely different avenue in terms of products. We're just talking about names. But you should try to look into what really makes something unique. And the best thing about making something unique is that it usually relates to a simple term, adjective, or concept. So look into that in terms of a simple category in those aspects of how someone views it. Remember, it's not how you view it. That's the problem with making a name too. Making a clothing brand name, it's not about how you view it. It's about how your target audience, customers, and basically what demographic you're trying to reach, how they view it. Remember, certain names and like the core idea of that name can change over time, through trends, and just simply changes through time, basically. So For example, you have a certain name that, you know, in 2015 it meant something else, and then now in 2025 it means something completely different. That's kind of hard to like push that same agenda as you did in 2020 or 2015. So you have to you have to understand that certain words, names, and concepts and adjectives change over time, and especially with the generation and the target audience you're trying to reach and the demographic, basically. So remember, changes do happen over time. So for longevity wise, you should probably choose a name that's more simple and relates to something, honestly, that connects to the brand, but not too much to the brand, where that will change over time through trends and TikTok and all that bullcrap, basically. But I'm looking at my notes real quick to make sure I give you guys all the right details, as always. But what's some keywords you can basically push? And some keywords is basically adjectives, historical references, personal connections. For example, you know, like if you have a moral code or something about not lying, or a moral code about using organic products, like, you know, something that connects to you, is very easy to slang it out if you have something that connects to you. That also leads to branding, basically, as well. And, you know, making a name is also about branding, but that's just the more overall core topic. But basically another will be like emotions and materials, and another core brainstorming keywords you could put into it is basically like services as well. For example, travel, or hospitality, and all those other things too. So you have to apply those things, and I'm talking in a very more category sense, because honestly, at the end of the day, it's really up to you what you want to name it. You know, for my clothing brand, when I was starting off, it was called Trip Lane, and that was very like off-putting. But the reason why it was called Trip Lane is because Trip, I just named it that way because it was very, not like super unique, but definitely off-putting. Because I had a few names before, but I just put some random word in front, like Trip Lane, and it just really popped off because it was very just like off-putting. Like people would look at it and be like, what the frick is a trip lane, you know? And that brought them in. And obviously my winning products kept them there and sold it and all those bull crap and stuff like that. Typical things you think of. Obviously there's a little bit more to it, but that's just basically what it was. So the name was very off-putting. It was very, got their attention. It was like a hook, got their attention, and the product made them stay. So made them buy the product and stuff like that. But that's just my clothing brand I have now is the clothing brand name I have now is basically the channel, or it's basically the clothing brand name I have now is basically the YouTube channel's name, not the establishment part. That's like the strictly for the YouTube, but it's basically just 7 Market. It's just basically named after a street, 7 Market. And the thing about it is that, like, I live in Long Beach, California, so it's not like, oh, well, the Long Beach, California thing. It's just more like a street name thing. Like, everyone can relate to 7th, like the number 7th, whether that's like a competitive placement, street name, or a list or something, the 7th on the list or something like that. A lot of people can relate to something so simple, a simple core idea, and connected to a market. And market is basically just where you sell and buy. And so, you know, when people think of that, it's 2 simple core ideas combined it together. So 7 Market is basically what it is. Nothing too special. It has like my personal connections for the branding, but not for the name. The name is just purely a simple base concept. And that's what you really have to do, is always going to be the idea that being simple is better. You know, changing up the words, changing up letters here and there also kind of help. But, you know, at the end of the day, simple is better.